Let's take a step back. Imagine trying to solve a complex software bug by smashing the keyboard harder. That's essentially how tariffs are being used right now. In a world that's more connected than ever, we're reverting to tools that were outdated decades ago, as if the global economy operates on the logic of a 19th century factory. It doesn't. Tariffs are a kind of economic duct tape, easy to grab, tough looking, but rarely the right fix. They're a response to fear, not foresight, and fear is a terrible architect for the future. Tariffs are a simplistic response to a complex global system. On the surface, they appear to be a tool of strength, a way to protect domestic industries, level the playing field, and address imbalances. But when you look deeper, the truth is more nuanced. The global economy doesn't operate on simple equations. It's a layered, dynamic, and highly interconnected network. Introducing tariffs into that system is like throwing sand into the gears of a precision engine. It doesn't just slow things down, it creates friction in places you didn't anticipate. In theory, tariffs are supposed to shield local industries from foreign competition. They're framed as a way to bring jobs back, reignite manufacturing, and punish countries that engage in unfair practices. But the reality is that they often do more harm than good, particularly in the long term. What they fail to account for is how deeply integrated global supply chains have become. It's no longer accurate to say that a product is made in one country. Your smartphone might be assembled in one nation, but its components are sourced from a dozen others. Chips from Taiwan, screens from South Korea, code written in California, and rare earth materials mined in Africa or China, all coming together to form a single device. When tariffs are imposed, they don't just affect the country being targeted, they affect every node in that supply chain. Costs go up, delays become common, and innovation slows down. Companies can't pivot quickly when their sourcing is disrupted. And when they do adapt, those changes often come at the cost of efficiency or quality. That cost is passed on to the consumer, and in a world where affordability and access drive adoption, particularly in emerging markets, that's a setback with real consequences. The argument that tariffs will bring back jobs assumes that those jobs were only lost to outsourcing, but much of what's gone has been displaced by automation. Robots, AI, and software have fundamentally changed the way we work. You can impose a tariff on steel imports, but you can't tariff the algorithm that replaces 5 line workers. If the root issue is technological disruption, using tariffs to fix it is like prescribing antibiotics for a broken bone. It's the wrong diagnosis, and the treatment causes side effects. This isn't just theory. History has given us clear examples of what happens when nations turn inward. The 1930s taught us that protectionist policies can amplify economic pain rather than reduce it. Markets contract, relationships fray, and retaliatory actions spiral into trade wars that leave everyone worse off. In the short term, some sectors may benefit, but the broader economy becomes more vulnerable, not less. One of the least talked about consequences of tariffs is how they affect innovation ecosystems. Innovation thrives on openness. When talent, ideas, and resources can move freely, breakthroughs happen faster. Scientific research, medical advancements, and technological development are almost always collaborative efforts. When you make it harder for parts and people to cross borders, you slow down that progress. The barriers may be economic, but the effect is intellectual and scientific stagnation. Moreover, tariffs distract from the real work that needs to be done. They offer the illusion of action, a bold move, a clear stance. But what's often needed is patient investment in infrastructure, education, and research. Competing in a global economy isn't about cutting others down, it's about building yourself up. That means funding the institutions that generate innovation, creating policies that support sustainable growth, and developing a workforce prepared for the industries of tomorrow. Tariffs don't develop talent. They don't accelerate learning. They don't strengthen partnerships or scale renewable energy or cure disease. They don't invent better batteries or reduce emissions. They simply shift the burden temporarily from one group to another. And often they do so without solving the underlying problem. When policies are made reactively, based on headlines or public pressure, without a deep understanding of the long-term ripple effects, we end up stuck in cycles of disruption. The global economy is not a battleground, it's an ecosystem, and like any ecosystem, balance is critical. Disrupting one part inevitably affects the whole. Sustainable progress requires strategies that are data-driven, future-focused, and globally aware. In a world where challenges like climate change, pandemics, and digital transformation cross all borders, retreating behind economic walls is not only unproductive, it's counterintuitive. The tools that will shape the future are intelligence, cooperation, and precision, not blunt instruments like tariffs. They may look like solutions in the short term, but over time, they shrink opportunities and reduce the scope of what's possible. And we can't afford to think that small. Innovation thrives on open borders, not closed ones. It's a simple yet profound truth that shapes the modern world. When you think about the biggest breakthroughs of the last several decades, whether in technology, medicine, or energy, they didn't happen in isolation. They happened because people, ideas, and resources flowed across countries and continents freely. When borders are open to collaboration and exchange, innovation accelerates exponentially. When they're closed, progress slows, and sometimes it grinds to a halt. The process of innovation is inherently collaborative. It's rarely a solitary endeavor. Most significant advancements come from networks of people building on each other's work, sharing insights, testing new ideas, and combining expertise from different fields. When borders are open, you tap into the best minds worldwide. You get diverse perspectives, fresh approaches, and complementary skills that might not exist in one country alone. That diversity fuels creativity and problem solving in ways that no single group could achieve by itself. Take the technology sector, for example. The devices and software we use daily are products of global collaboration. The microchips in our computers are designed in one country, manufactured in another, and assembled somewhere else entirely. Software engineers from across the world contribute to open source projects that power everything from cloud computing to artificial intelligence. If borders were closed, or if restrictions on talent mobility increased, the pace of innovation would slow dramatically. Companies would struggle to find the right expertise, supply chains would become fragile, and the cost of development would rise. Medical research offers another clear example. The development of vaccines, treatments, and diagnostics often depends on international teams working together. When an outbreak happens, sharing data openly and rapidly across borders saves lives. Scientists collaborate on clinical trials that span multiple countries, allowing them to test the safety and efficacy of treatments on diverse populations. Restricting access or imposing barriers would delay these crucial developments and limit their effectiveness. Beyond specific industries, open borders enable the flow of talent, which is critical to innovation. The ability for students, researchers, and professionals to move freely and work where their skills are most needed creates a dynamic environment where ideas flourish. Many countries benefit from attracting foreign experts who bring new knowledge and perspectives. At the same time, their own citizens gain experience abroad, returning with valuable skills and connections. Closing borders curtails these exchanges and risks creating insular ecosystems that lack the vitality and breadth needed to compete globally. It's also important to consider the role of global markets. Innovation is expensive, and companies need to scale quickly to recoup their investments and fund further research. Open borders facilitate access to larger markets, enabling startups and established companies alike to grow and reach customers worldwide. Without this, innovations can remain stuck in small, local markets, limiting their impact and reducing incentives to innovate in the first place. Furthermore, open borders help distribute the benefits of innovation more equitably. When countries collaborate, innovations can spread faster to developing regions, improving health outcomes, increasing productivity, and raising living standards. Closing borders often results in concentrated innovation in a few wealthy countries, exacerbating global inequalities and slowing progress on shared challenges like climate change or global health crises. This idea extends to knowledge and data sharing, which are essential components of modern innovation. Open borders encourage open access to research, enabling scientists and engineers to build on existing work rather than reinventing the wheel. Intellectual property laws need to balance protection with collaboration, ensuring creators are rewarded while allowing the broader community to advance. When borders are closed, information becomes siloed, slowing discovery and innovation. There are legitimate concerns about protecting national security and economic interests, but the solution is not to erect barriers that stifle innovation. Instead, policies should focus on intelligent collaboration, creating frameworks that allow safe, fair, and efficient exchange of ideas and talent. The goal should be to maintain open channels that foster innovation while managing risks carefully and transparently. History provides clear lessons on the importance of openness. Periods of isolationism and protectionism have rarely coincided with bursts of innovation. On the contrary, the greatest waves of progress have occurred during times of increased connectivity and exchange. The Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, and the Information Age all emerged from environments where knowledge and people flowed relatively freely. Innovation is not a solitary act. It's a collective endeavor that requires trust, communication, and access. Closing borders threatens to dismantle the ecosystems that enable this. It undermines universities, research institutions, and companies that rely on international collaboration. It discourages the free exchange of ideas that sparks new technologies and solutions. It fragments the global scientific community and slows down responses to urgent problems. Looking ahead, the challenges we face, whether climate change, pandemic preparedness, or building sustainable energy systems, demand even more cooperation, not less. They require pooling resources, sharing data, and mobilizing talent on a global scale. Innovation will be the key to solving these problems, and innovation depends on openness. Ultimately, embracing open borders is not just about economics or politics. It's about recognizing that human progress is a shared journey. The future belongs to those who can collaborate across boundaries, harness diverse talents, and build networks that span the globe. Closing borders may offer a sense of control or protection in the short term, but in the long run, it restricts the possibilities that come from working together. Innovation thrives in openness because it leverages the collective intelligence, creativity, and resources of all humanity. To slow that flow is to slow progress itself. If we want a future defined by breakthroughs and solutions to the world's biggest problems, we need to keep our doors open, our ideas flowing, and our communities connected across borders. History shows protectionism rarely ends well. Time and again, when countries have turned inward, raising tariffs, erecting trade barriers, and trying to shield their economies from outside forces, the consequences have been more damaging than anticipated. Protectionism often comes from a place of understandable concern. Governments want to safeguard their industries, protect jobs, and preserve national interests. But when policies become overly defensive and restrictive, they can trigger a cascade of negative effects that ripple through the economy and society. The most famous historical example is probably the period leading up to the Great Depression. In the early 1930s, many countries adopted protectionist policies, hoping to insulate themselves from the global economic downturn. The United States passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in 1930, which dramatically increased tariffs on thousands of imported goods. The intention was to protect American farmers and manufacturers by reducing foreign competition, but the reality was starkly different. Other countries retaliated with their own tariffs, and international trade contracted sharply. What could have been a mitigating measure instead deepened the crisis, prolonging economic pain worldwide. This episode is a powerful reminder that economies don't function in isolation. When one country imposes barriers, others respond in kind. Trade wars escalate, supply chains get disrupted, and markets shrink. The interconnected nature of modern economies means that these policies rarely protect as intended. They end up hurting the very industries and workers they aim to defend. Beyond the economic contraction, protectionism has other damaging effects. Consumers face higher prices and fewer choices. When tariffs increase the cost of imported goods, domestic producers may have less incentive to innovate or improve efficiency. Without the pressure of foreign competition, complacency can set in, leading to stagnation. In a rapidly evolving global marketplace, this loss of competitiveness can be fatal over time. The problem is compounded by the fact that industries today are rarely self-contained within a single country. Supply chains stretch across borders, with components sourced from multiple nations before final assembly. Protectionist policies that target imports in one sector can inadvertently disrupt production in others. For example, tariffs on steel and aluminum don't just affect those raw materials. They also raise costs for manufacturers who rely on them, from car makers to appliance producers. These ripple effects often go unnoticed in political debates, but are very real in boardrooms and factories. Furthermore, protectionism can damage diplomatic relationships. Trade is more than just an economic exchange. It's a form of international cooperation. When countries start imposing barriers, it breeds distrust and tension. Long-standing alliances and partnerships can fray, making it harder to collaborate on other global issues such as climate change, security, or public health. The global challenges of today demand cooperation, not isolation. There are instances where targeted protective measures have been used effectively to nurture emerging industries. The so-called infant industry argument suggests that some sectors may need temporary shielding to develop and become competitive. However, history shows that such protections often outlive their usefulness, becoming permanent crutches that distort markets and discourage innovation. It takes strong governance and clear sunset provisions to ensure that these policies don't become a long-term liability. Another important consideration is that protectionism can hurt developing economies disproportionately. Wealthier nations often have the resources to absorb the costs of tariffs or retaliatory actions. Poorer countries, which rely heavily on exports to drive growth and improve living standards, suffer more when global trade contracts. This exacerbates global inequalities and reduces opportunities for shared progress. Technology and globalization have made the world economy more complex, but the lessons from history remain relevant. The rise and fall of protectionism in various eras show a pattern: short-term gains at the expense of long-term growth. As the world faces new challenges, from digital transformation to climate change, strategies that retreat into protectionism risk limiting our collective ability to adapt and innovate. Instead, a more effective approach involves embracing openness while managing risks carefully. Trade policies should encourage fair competition and address legitimate concerns like intellectual property theft or environmental standards, but without resorting to broad, punitive tariffs. Investing in education, infrastructure, and technology to boost competitiveness is far more sustainable than trying to block imports. Ultimately, history teaches that protectionism is a blunt instrument, ill-suited to the complexities of the modern economy. Its promise of security often masks the reality of greater instability and slower progress. When countries choose to build walls rather than bridges, they limit their own potential and undermine the global system that has lifted millions out of poverty. The challenge moving forward is to design policies that balance national interests with global cooperation. We need to protect what matters: workers, innovation, the environment, without cutting off the flows of trade and ideas that fuel growth. It requires vision, patience, and an understanding that in an interconnected world, no nation thrives alone. If we forget these lessons and repeat the mistakes of the past, we risk squandering opportunities and facing economic setbacks that will be difficult to recover from. The stakes are high, and the path forward must be guided by a clear-eyed view of history and a commitment to building an open, resilient global economy. Short-term politics shouldn't override long-term strategy. This is a principle that applies not only in business and technology, but in every aspect of economic policy. The pressure to deliver quick wins or immediate results can be overwhelming for decision makers, especially in democratic systems where election cycles create urgency for visible accomplishments. But when policy decisions prioritize short-term political gain over sustainable long-term planning, the consequences can be damaging and far-reaching. In the realm of economic policy, this tension is especially acute. Leaders face immense pressure to respond rapidly to public concerns, whether it's unemployment, trade imbalances, or inflation. Tariffs, for example, often emerge as a politically attractive tool because they can be framed as protecting domestic jobs or punishing unfair trade practices. They're easy to communicate. We're standing up for our country. This kind of rhetoric resonates with voters and can rally support quickly. However, framing economic challenges in simple, immediate terms tends to overlook the complex realities underneath. The global economy isn't a short game, it's a marathon. Implementing tariffs or protectionist measures might deliver a headline or two of political applause, but those policies rarely align with the intricate supply chains, investment decisions, and innovation cycles that actually drive long-term prosperity. True economic strength depends on strategic investments that don't pay off overnight. Building a competitive workforce requires years of commitment to education and training. Developing new technologies and industries takes sustained funding for research and development. Improving infrastructure, from transportation to digital networks, requires planning, coordination, and patience. These efforts don't generate quick headlines, but they build the foundation for lasting growth. Moreover, economic policies that favor short-term gains often neglect the broader system effects. Imposing tariffs might protect a handful of jobs temporarily, but the increased costs to manufacturers and consumers can ripple through the economy. Companies might delay investments or relocate production elsewhere. Consumers face higher prices, reducing their purchasing power and confidence. These knock-on effects tend to emerge slowly but persistently, undermining growth over time. The challenge is compounded by the fast pace of today's political news cycle. Leaders are judged on immediate outcomes, often through sound bites and social media. This environment incentivizes quick fixes rather than deep thinking. But economic policy requires the opposite mindset: careful analysis, consultation with experts, and a willingness to accept trade-offs and delayed gratification. Another dimension to consider is that short-term political strategies can create uncertainty for businesses and investors. When policies shift abruptly to satisfy immediate political goals, it becomes difficult for companies to plan and innovate. Stable, predictable policy environments are crucial for attracting investment and fostering innovation. If businesses fear sudden tariff hikes or changing regulations, they may hold back on developing new products or expanding operations. Long-term strategy also requires cooperation across borders and political parties. Trade, technology development, and climate action are global challenges that demand continuity and collaboration. When policies are driven by short-term politics, they risk becoming inconsistent or confrontational, damaging alliances and undermining trust. This unpredictability can isolate countries, reduce cooperation, and limit access to international markets and knowledge networks. Sustainable economic leadership involves balancing immediate needs with future goals. It means communicating clearly with the public about why some policies take time to bear fruit, and why the best solutions may not be the most politically expedient. It requires courage to resist the temptation of easy slogans and instead champion policies grounded in data, evidence, and strategic vision. Looking back at history, some of the most successful economies have demonstrated this balance. They invested heavily in education systems decades before the benefits were visible in the workforce. They supported fundamental research long before commercial applications emerged. They built infrastructure projects with long planning horizons. These countries showed patience and discipline, recognizing that true competitiveness is built over generations. The same principle applies to emerging challenges today. Issues like climate change, technological disruption, and global health require sustained commitment and long-term planning. Short-term political tactics may offer the illusion of progress, but they won't solve these complex problems. Instead, they risk wasting precious time and resources. Ultimately, policymakers need to think beyond the immediate election cycle. They need to build coalitions that support forward-looking strategies. They need to educate the public about the value of investing in tomorrow, even if it means making sacrifices today. That's not easy, but it's necessary for building resilient economies that can adapt and thrive in a rapidly changing world. Short-term politics will always be part of governance, but it should never dominate the decision-making process. If we allow it to do so, we risk undermining the very foundation of long-term prosperity. The real challenge and the real opportunity is to craft policies that are informed by evidence, designed for durability, and focused on the future. That's the path to sustainable growth and lasting progress. We need smarter tools for global competition. The world today is more interconnected and complex than ever before, and the challenges we face require sophisticated approaches that go beyond traditional methods. Competition in the global economy isn't just about tariffs or trade restrictions. It's about innovation, education, infrastructure, and collaboration. To succeed, countries must equip themselves with tools that enable them to compete effectively in this new landscape, tools that foster creativity, agility, and resilience. At the heart of global competition is innovation. The pace of technological change is accelerating, and those who lead in research and development gain a critical advantage. Investing in cutting-edge technologies like artificial intelligence, biotechnology, renewable energy, and advanced manufacturing isn't optional anymore. It's essential. Countries and companies that fail to prioritize these areas risk falling behind in economic relevance and influence, but innovation isn't simply about throwing money at labs. It requires building ecosystems where ideas can flourish, universities, research centers, startups, and corporations working together, supported by policies that encourage risk taking and protect intellectual property. Education is another indispensable tool. The workforce of the future will need skills that adapt to rapidly evolving industries. This means a strong emphasis not only on science, technology, engineering, and math, but also on critical thinking, creativity, and lifelong learning. Investing in education systems that prepare students for these demands is crucial. It's not enough to train people for today's jobs. We need to prepare them for jobs that don't yet exist. Countries that neglect this will struggle to maintain competitiveness as talent becomes the currency of the modern economy. Infrastructure also plays a critical role in global competition. Modern economies depend on reliable transportation networks, digital connectivity, and energy systems. Smart investments in these areas create the backbone for business growth and innovation. For example, widespread access to high-speed internet is no longer a luxury but a necessity. It enables remote work, access to information, and participation in the digital economy. Without it, communities fall behind and opportunities shrink. Similarly, developing sustainable energy infrastructure is essential not only for environmental reasons, but also for economic competitiveness as energy costs and regulations evolve worldwide. Global competition also demands collaboration, both within countries and across borders. No country can innovate or produce everything on its own. The supply chains that power today's economy stretch across continents, and they require coordination and trust. Collaborative research programs, joint ventures, and international standards can all contribute to creating competitive advantages. Open channels of communication allow companies and governments to learn from each other and avoid costly duplication of effort. In addition, smarter tools for competition must include policies that encourage entrepreneurship. Startups are engines of innovation, bringing fresh ideas and challenging established norms. Creating an environment where entrepreneurs can thrive requires access to capital, streamlined regulations, and supportive networks. It also means fostering a culture that celebrates risk taking and doesn't punish failure too harshly. When entrepreneurs have the freedom to experiment, society benefits from new products, services, and job opportunities. Data is another critical asset in the modern competitive toolkit. The ability to collect, analyze, and apply data effectively gives companies and governments a significant edge. Whether it's improving supply chain efficiency, understanding customer preferences, or optimizing resource allocation, data-driven decision making leads to smarter, faster outcomes. However, managing data responsibly, ensuring privacy, security, and ethical use is equally important. Countries that can balance innovation with trust will be the ones that lead. Trade policy also needs to evolve as part of smarter global competition. Rather than relying on blunt instruments like tariffs, countries should pursue agreements that promote fair competition, intellectual property protection, environmental standards, and labor rights. These frameworks create a level playing field and reduce uncertainties. Moreover, trade policies should support the integration of developing countries into the global economy. expanding markets and fostering shared prosperity. Another aspect of smarter competition is sustainability. The future economy must be green, resilient, and inclusive. Climate change poses one of the greatest challenges and opportunities for innovation. Investing in clean technologies, circular economy models, and sustainable practices not only helps the planet, but also creates new industries and jobs. Companies and countries that lead in sustainability will have a competitive advantage as consumers, investors, and regulators increasingly prioritize environmental responsibility. Governance and leadership are the glue that holds all these tools together. Effective institutions that are transparent, accountable, and forward-looking create an environment where innovation and competition can thrive. Policymakers must be willing to listen to experts, engage with stakeholders, and plan beyond election cycles. They need to build coalitions that support long-term investments and resist the temptation of short-term fixes. In summary, global competition today requires more than traditional economic tactics. It demands a comprehensive approach that embraces innovation, education, infrastructure, collaboration, entrepreneurship, data, fair trade, sustainability, and strong governance. These are the smarter tools that can help countries and companies not just survive, but lead in the evolving global landscape. Equipping ourselves with these tools is a strategic imperative. The stakes are high, and the pace of change will only quicken. Those who invest wisely, think creatively, and act collaboratively will shape the future. Those who cling to outdated methods risk being left behind. The choice is clear: adapt and innovate or fall behind. Tariffs might score points in a political debate, but they rarely solve the problems they're supposed to. If we want to lead in the 21st century, the answer isn't isolation, it's integration. It's not tariffs. It's talent, trust, and technology. So, the real question isn't whether we can win a trade war. It's whether we can afford to keep fighting battles that make the future smaller, not bigger.